Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 113 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sara.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
Oddly feel kind of rushed coming to the show tonight.
A little bit, yeah.
It was odd. Like, we had time, and yet I still feel rushed.
Well,
we were just enjoying a good conversation.
we were kind of pre-gaming the discussion a little bit, so...
which always helps.
It always does help.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's
been a week all over the place.
It's been a little bit busy, a little hectic.
But we got a little holiday coming up.
A little holiday.
You've got some time off.
I've got next week off. Typically, Sean and I would be going up north.
Right.
But we're not doing that because of COVID concerns and such like that. So
yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody's going to be going crazy. Like I know around here, gas is starting to get hard to find.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. I know for me, the idea of going out of town this weekend seems a little silly just because of everything else going on. But I have my game I'm running, so I'm happy to have that.
Yeah, I'm excited for your game. Getting some minis painted up for it.
Yeah. We are kind of coming to the close of one of the bits of story. You guys are going to be kind of wrapping up the orc story with this a little bit.
It's always exciting wrapping up those big chapters and stuff like that. And you just kind of hope that your endings land the way that you want them to.
You know, I've taken to the point of accepting whatever landing I get because I know the Russian judge is always going to give me like a 7.5.
Oh God, no, they're brutal.
They're just brutal. They're just brutal. I could stick that landing, and it's just not going to come over right. So
both you and I are wrapping up like major chapters in our campaigns right now.
Yeah, which feels nice. It feels nice. Although my brain immediately went to, I'm not prepared for the physicalness of this. Oh crap! But you've helped me out. We have some miniatures and stuff, and we have enough crew that it's fine.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Amongst our friends, we have a collective butt ton of terrain and miniatures and stuff like that. So really, all you got to say is just, hey, anybody got
one of these or this,
or this or a few of these, and we'll come together. We'll make the story happen for you. It's fine.
Yeah, it is nuts that we have done this 113 times, and actually just mentioning in our live chat, which you can join if you get on our Discord and join our Patreon. It's really not that bad. And you can chat with us live while we're doing these recordings and listen to us live on Mixlr.
Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a Patreon for that.
No, that's totally available. But 113 times. Oh my Lord.
Yeah, I get a little every time I read that number and it increments by one. I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah, it gets a little daunting, but at the same time, like, we still got stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
This hasn't ended. So speaking of things to talk about, organic lore exposition. The word exposition always gets me on this part of it.
So let me ask you. Let me start by asking you a question.
Sure.
Have you ever read a book that just jumps right in and just starts throwing like lore, like words, like buzzwords, like vocabulary words at you?
Yes.
It just you just end up reading the first chapter of it like 3 times because you have no clue what's going on. They give you no context.
I remember reading an Isaac Asimov book for the first time, and I had failed as a human and accidentally grabbed a book in the series. I didn't realize it was in a series because of the naming convention.
Yep.
And I had grabbed like book 2 or book 3. And so these are established characters. This is established everything. Mm-hmm. And I just started reading it. I'm like, I have no idea about anything that's going on here. It makes no sense to me. Like, I went back, read the preamble, I'm like, and it didn't kind of expose it as a series for whatever reason. I'm like, I don't know if I can read this. And then I just haphazardly, I'm like, I don't know if I can get into this. And they're like, you can't get into that series, or you can't get into that book of the series. I'm like, what?
Series?
Yeah, and I was at a total loss at that point. For
me, it was Wheel of Time.
Oh yeah, you were saying that. Yeah.
I started off with the first book of Wheel of Time, The Eye of the World, and it starts off with kind of in media res. There is a prologue that takes place, I think, about like 3,000 years. If Sean is in the live chat, he'll be able to correct me on this one.
Yeah.
Takes place about 3,000 years, like prior to any of the events. And it it throws a lot of big words at you that you've never heard before.
Right,
because you
right.
literally just started reading the book, like Aes Sedai and Sidene and the One Power.
Right.
And Shaitan, and introducing these characters, and there's like madness going on, so it's pure chaos. You're not really sure what's happening. And then chapter 1 starts, just completely different characters, like has seemingly nothing to do. In fact, you don't really actually understand what that inciting incident in the prologue has to do with anything for quite some time into the story until you get a full context for it. And I remember reading over it like probably 3-4 times and just putting the book back on the shelf because I couldn't get past all the vocab, all the buzzwords of it, trying to like hit me with lore, but not teach me any of the lore.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
There was another book that got me like that, and I wouldn't, like, now that I'm looking back on it, the feeling, it was a Tom Clancy novel.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
And even though it's contemporary, and even though a lot of the basics of it, something, at the time that I was reading it, I did not understand the geopolitical stuff that it was referring to. I'd not read into that. And so I'm reading about this, and I'm going, none of this makes... Why would we be doing this? What are we doing? Like, why is he involved in this? Why is an analyst involved with any... Like, it just didn't add... Like, The whole first chapter didn't add up at all, and, like, why this conflict was going on and why he was getting pulled into the secondary discussion. And it was all based upon the preconception that you had to know that the U.S. was involved in the drug trade in South America heavily.
Yep.
At a very specific time in history.
Yep.
And then it was based off of that stuff. And at the time, I was not familiar with it.
I mean, we call that history, but in a storytelling sense, that's still lore.
Yeah.
You know?
And the same thing came in some ways for some other things that I read, only because I only had a very light sampling of some of the political history of Eastern Europe, European countries and Russia. Mm-hmm. People would, suggest these books to me that were about, the czars and of that time, because I was talking about things with 7C, and I had no reference. Mm-hmm. Like, they just jump right into it, and you're like, I'm sorry, what? Like, excuse me? Like, this is a great story, I'm sure, but I have no idea who the Boyers are.
Now, let me ask you another question, then.
Sure.
Have you ever read a book that just started rambling on and on and on for, like, multiple pages about just the history of something, and you find yourself at some point during that exposition asking yourself, how long is this going to go on, and is this going to be on the test?
Can I go back to Asimov?
Yeah, well, yeah.
I mean, effectively, a lot of the opening stuff on his series feels like that. It feels like you have to get this huge wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, Asimov was hard sci-fi,
but he had to explain it.
But he did have to explain it, and so I mean, I think if you're reading hard sci-fi, you're kind of there for that. But at the same time, I think it
still touches on the same point.
It still touches on the same point. For me, it was Lord of the Rings.
Without a doubt, I can understand that.
I got
couldn't get through the Silmarillion. I mean, come on.
I loved the movies. I absolutely loved the movies because a lot of what would take up multiple pages of description was just background dressing. In the movie.
Yeah,
and it was hyper specific, very accurate background dressing.
Yeah.
But for me, like, if you're reading the book, it's like 4 pages of describing what the architecture of this building looked like, and it's like, come on, man,
Well, Snow Crash did the same thing for me. Snow Crash, you have to imagine, was written in a time prior to the internet, prior to VR, prior to all that, and it had to describe basically what a virtual chat room was, what it looked like in high detail. So literally, like 7 to 8 pages are description of the guy's digital VR effectively chat room.
Yeah.
Because nobody had a freaking clue what that was.
Well, and to be fair, Tolkien, I think, was the same thing. It was a product of his time. You can't just... Tolkien-esque was not a thing because Tolkien was not a thing, until Tolkien became a thing.
Right, and even comics couldn't... You couldn't use it as a reference. Like, yeah, you had Conan, but Conan wasn't anything referencing into that.
Yeah.
You had... You just didn't have the same type of
presence in pop culture
tropes.
Yeah.
To be able to be assistive. Now we do, And it helps.
So you can kind of say orc or elf, and people know what you're talking about.
Correct.
When Tolkien was writing these things, he needed that amount of description. So, I mean, to be fair to Tolkien and to the author of Snow Crash, I apologize, I don't know.
Neil Stephenson.
My
God, I just pulled that one out of my head. Whoa, am I off today?
To be fair to them, they were, that writing was a product of their time because they were on the bleeding edge of their own genre.
Indeed. I 100% agree on that.
But the point we're kind of getting at, because this is a show about tabletop role-playing games and not about books, is that if I were sitting at J.R.R. Tolkien's D&D table, and he started lore dumping the same way that he lore dumps in his books, about an hour and a half into his opening monologue, I'd politely excuse myself from his table. Because I would be falling asleep.
It's a history class.
It's a history class, yeah, exactly.
In a fictional history.
And so is wonderful. And to be fair, I am also a big Wheel of Time fan. Absolutely loved the series, but I had to get it through it on audiobooks because I found the lore to be so dense that I couldn't move at my own pace. I needed a narrator to move me at their pace.
Correct, which again, we're doing tabletop.
Yeah,
that's
we
have to remember. Yeah. So all of these things add to this discussion today of what it means to do it organically and what to actually take from all of this media that gets pressed upon us. That tabletop is not a book. Tabletop is not a movie.
Yeah.
Tabletop is not a podcast. Thank you very much. It is its own entry point, and because of that, you have to treat your lore and its exposition differently.
As such, exactly.
The closest thing I can tell you, and I'm going to put this at the beginning, and I'll reference it again and again, tabletop role-playing is a sitcom. And I will come back to this multiple times.
Okay.
It is a sitcom.
I'm going to love to hear this one.
Well, I'll keep re-referencing, but let's start at books, because I think books is a great place to start, and what we can learn from them is a great thing.
Real quick, Sean in the live chat
says,
did you know that Robert Jordan wrote 7 Conan the Barbarian books?
Really?
I did not know that.
I did not know that.
Robert Jordan, author of Wheel of Time.
And Conan.
Apparently, and Conan.
Which
all right.
Makes sense from what I know of Conan.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's
so,
cool. All right.
So let's get into books and what they don't do well, and definitely what they've taught us poorly.
Right.
Because I will even blame the actual role-playing books that we learned the game systems from.
Yeah,
taught us poorly.
I think one of the main problems is that you and I grew up before a lot of the technology that we currently have was
100%.
available,
Yep.
and because of the things that we had available to us at the time, we carry on those habits through the technological age because we're too old to program a VCR at this point.
That's an awesome way of saying it, but I agree with your statement.
So, I was giving some thoughts too of kind of how books have taught us to plot to lore dump and some of the bad habits they've given us and stuff like that. In thinking about a lot of the difference that tabletop RPGs have to them, and the first thing is stories are interactive. Our tabletop stories are interactive and malleable. Okay, you're not writing a book. And so you don't need to lore dump in the exact same way. You can do it little bit by little bit as it's relevant, as it's interacted with, rather than needing to set the scene for a reader.
Correct.
So you can kind of trickle your lore out and not need to dump it at all.
100%.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest tips that we can provide in this entire episode right here is just make it bite-sized.
Yeah, and I'm going to start with my references for sitcoms and general TV shows and what they taught well, and that is name a show that opens with a narrator explaining anything about the world that has been produced in the last, I will say, 15 years.
A TV show?
Any TV show, sitcom, anything like that the first show, not the pilot, but the actual first episode, actually narrates or presents the world. Where you're not in media res the moment you get in.
I kind of want to say Good Omens did it.
It did. And you know why? Because it's a book.
Because it's... Okay, you got me there.
So anything else beyond that, and I literally think anything from the fantifical to the contemporary.
Fantastical?
I say fantifical because it's pure fictiony fantasy.
Okay.
So Buffy
Gotcha.
is a good example.
Okay.
You know, when you stepped into that world, there was no question what was going on. Mm-hmm. Granted, there was a movie to ride before that. Okay, fine. Let me shift to another one. Burn Notice.
I love Burn Notice.
Right. One of your favorite TV shows that you taught me about, which unfortunately I can't remember the name.
Justified?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Opens in media res, and you know exactly what's going on.
Yep.
And that is one of the things to learn from, is that your world is only as big as it needs to be viewed.
Mm-hmm.
We'll step on from there.
Okay. Okay. So the other major thing is that your stories can feature many different types of media.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. We are living in, and this is kind of what I was alluding to when I said that we were born in an age before a lot of these things were possible, and now we don't know how to program the metaphorical VCR. Is because we Rob and I, started storytelling in the 80s, early 90s, so a lot of we didn't have the internet as much back then. We didn't have tablet devices with high resolution photos able to be shown on them and whatnot. Like if we needed pictures, we had to draw them,
photocopy them,
or photocopy them.
Yep.
Yes,
photocopy.
So. Yeah, exactly. I remember photocopying character sheets, but I digress.
Minis were important.
Yep. So nowadays, though, you can do your storytelling as a multimedia presentation. You've got voice and text descriptions for your narration, but also you can throw in music.
Mm-hmm.
You can throw in sound effects.
Without a doubt.
You can show pictures of what things look like. There is, especially nowadays in the age of 3D printing, and services that will do that for you if you do not have one yourself, miniatures on demand.
Yeah, I mean, you can, through Etsy and some of even the 3D maker sites, for $20 you can literally get pretty much whatever you need.
Yeah.
And anything. Now, granted, $20 is a lot to spend, but at the same time, it's custom craft.
It's custom.
If I need to have a Stonehenge, I can order a Stonehenge. I don't have to try and piece it together through 5 different part kits or try and make it out of foam if I'm not that crafty. I can just have it made for me.
Yeah,
and it's done.
And speaking of crafty, we didn't have YouTube back in the day. Not to turn this into a back in my day discussion or anything like that, but we didn't have YouTube. We didn't have Blackmagic Crafts.
No.
We didn't have DM Scotty and stuff like that showing us how to, on the budget with paper towel rolls and 50-cent craft paints from Michaels, showing you how to throw together this Stonehenge that you want. And so a lot of this stuff has become very, very accessible. And when you can just lay out a miniature and say, this is what the thing looks like.
Yeah.
How much time did I just save you?
Yeah.
I mean, the old adage goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
And that is exactly where it comes down to, is if the less you are physically describing and the closer you can get to either a trope or a legitimate image. You can get the image, you can get the feel, you can get the texture, if you will, of what you're trying to describe. Great. But added to all of that, which you've done a great job painting, is the fact that not just you, but everyone has that relatively at their fingertips. Now, when you look at somebody who lives in Iowa and you're playing a game with them, instead of them not understanding what an Irish hill with old architecture, an old castle on it looks like, without presenting a book to them, they can pull it up themselves. They can go look through it.
Yeah.
When you need to describe what Daedric Ruins looks like, it's literally a 4-word and 1-button press away.
It's a 2-word press, a Daedric Ruin.
Well, you might need to add other words to it depending on what you're actually trying to get across.
Right. But yeah, your point's well taken though. is that it's a great tool to grab these things, even if your storyteller doesn't have them. It's actually one of the big reasons why, like, I really loved using a VTT, was because it actually forced me into a visual medium. When I'm sitting face to face with you, I usually lean on narration because that's what I grew up knowing, you know.
Well, it's what we were taught how to do it.
Exactly. It's a storytelling game, so I'm telling you a story.
Right.
And it's nice in person because you get to see, you know, like I like to prep miniatures and stuff like that.
Sure.
I'm the crafty DM. But also, you know, seeing people's expressions, and I can gesticulate and have body language and such like that to embody my NPCs, and I like all of that. But what VTTs taught me, what especially Foundry VTT, was I got into the habit of using establishing shots.
Yeah.
And this is actually a thing that they do a lot, like you said, in TV shows.
Exceptionally so.
So an establishing shot, for those of you who don't know the term, is watch any TV show, and right before they, like at the very beginning of a scene change, they will show you like 2 seconds of the outside of the building.
WandaVision did this a lot in the Marvel stuff. Is you'd always get an establishing shot of the area. Maybe like when they were doing the scene of the talent show. You got establishing shots of the town, so you knew an event was going on
In the town.
right, and then suddenly you were presented with the scene, the stage, the act, and everything else that was going on.
And then something changes in the scene, and we've got a shot, kind of a top-down shot of the FBI camp outside of the hex.
Correct.
And we know now, with just seeing that for 2 seconds, okay, now we're going to be in the FBI camp.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
or the whatever the government agency was,
Right.
sword
Right.
camp.
Yeah.
or
So
whatever it was.
yeah.
You know what I mean, though.
Yeah.
Those are something they use all the time. So you know, watch them and they'll even do it like Star Trek was big for it. You'd always see like a 2-second shot of the outside of the Enterprise.
Yeah.
When they come back from a commercial break, here's the Enterprise. Like, we didn't know it was the Enterprise, but like they still put the establishing shot there. You know?
Yeah. Whether they were, are we in deep space? Are we over the planet? Are we next to a bird of prey at a wide-angle shot, nose to nose, you know?
So,
are we, even the ones that always would get me is when they're drifting sideways through the shot with something leaking out of them. Oh my gosh, they're in peril.
Yeah.
Like,
but it's an establishing shot.
Yeah.
Here we are in deep space and deep crap.
Exactly.
You know? But to kind of bring that into like your VTTs and possibly even your tabletop game, if you have something like a tablet device or even just a phone that you could show, pull something up on and show it around. For instance, when I opened the game where you guys were in the tavern, on your way to the village where you were going to be confronting the Poppy King. Okay. And I remember you actually stopped game for just a couple seconds to say that was a really beautiful establishing shot.
it really was. It was a beautiful establishing shot.
But how much of that tavern did I have to describe to you guys?
0.
Yeah.
Really?
I mean,
0.
I think I wrote a couple lines about that it was warm and cozy.
Yeah.
Or something like
You
that.
made it, you established our feelings within it.
But as far as giving you an idea of what it looked like on the inside, though, all I had was a picture pulled up. And a little bit of like lighting animation over the fire sources in the thing to get them to flicker a little bit.
Yep. And some sound effect.
And some music in the background. That did all that lore dumping for me, just having that picture.
Yep.
Literally worth 1,000 words for me.
Yeah. And that kind of thing has made a huge jump in our digital presentations. Now, bringing that back to the physical table, we're bringing out our speakers again. We're presenting screens to our players or minis to our players to kind of get that back around. But it's that general direct interaction that the players have to help capture their attention, hold their attention, and give them something that they can latch onto that is either a trope that they're already aware of and or an experience they're familiar with. You can't beat that.
You can't beat it.
You can't beat
it
that
at all.
One of the things that I was going to talk about with specifically that cinema does well in this,
Okay.
in the way that lore gets presented, you don't, because of the situations and the way you lay things out, even if you're still describing, you don't have to go into heavy detail. A great thing that cinema does is, if it is something that is recognizably known, whether it's contemporary or historical. For instance, if I say you hear the whopping engines of Huey gunships, helicopters coming in low over a thick jungle with the reddish golden sunrise before them, and the sounds of Jefferson airplane music being blared out the side as one of the guy basically is slowly belt feeding his gun. I don't have to explain that you're probably over Vietnam.
Yep.
I don't have to do that for a lot of people. But if I present an image of that, I've done the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, there's a feel, there's a general edge to it that all gets expressed because the trope and the contemporariness is there. Again, I didn't have to explain much. I got all the points across. Four individuals in black suits step out of a vehicle with black bags and start heading toward a bank. They pull ski masks over their head as the young driver thumbs wildly at the steering wheel while he's left in the car. Okay, I don't have to explain what's going on there.
This is a heist movie.
Correct.
Yep.
And there are 3 individuals and a driver. Okay, we kind of know where things are going to go from here.
Yep.
It's contemporary. It's easy to find. These are the things that there is no frame of reference. There's no need for a narrator because we're in a contemporary setting. So you can back off all of the required storytelling and give just a quick establishing shot, the car, maybe the building of the bank, and you're done. You are now in heist mode. I don't have to explain the city, who runs it, who the mayor is, what time of day it is even necessarily. It's daytime. That's all that matters.
Exactly.
You know they're going to break into the bank, and they're probably going to have a timer on that, and there's going to be things involved with that. Then you step to the next level of that, where you give a frame of reference. Traditionally, it's done with prologue in movies, where you give a very short pre-scene. And Fifth Element did this. Lord of the Rings did this in the movies. With Fellowship of the Rings, where you get the backstory in a quick, short lore dump, explaining everything through narration, and then immediately you're put into story after that. And you have a pretty good idea of what's important, because it always presents the Chekhov's gun. Always. It gives you that one item that is going to be brought up exceptionally soon, and you already know it's important.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Not that it's an arguable movie, but Valerian, City of a Thousand Worlds, had direct narration at the beginning of it. The Hobbit had direct narration at the beginning of it. This can often lead to muddled openings because there's too much to explain. That if visuals don't give you enough.
Yeah, I feel like doing that is kind of like, kind of a cardinal sin of lore dumping, because you've got no context for anything that you're about to learn, and therefore you're going to internalize maybe 20% of it.
Exactly. And so it often gets to a point where the rest of the movie is then forced to explain why any of that was important. How does this impact this individual?
It's great on a rewatch, but you don't get a rewatch of a tabletop game.
Correct. Now, on the other hand, if you've got something that gives you a lot more time to do it, like a TV series that is breaking down a book, Good Omens does a great job of it.
Yeah.
Because you get that refresh. I'll come back to the refresh that they do well. The last one, which is the most, the least used yet most effective, is opening crawl. Star Wars does a great job of it. Everybody remembers the Star Wars crawl, whether they know it specifically or not. It's less than 3 paragraphs crammed into something that you're staring at a screen with powerful music behind it that literally paints the 50,000-foot overview, or the several light year overview. You then bring it down to a level of what is going on in this scene. Like, why is this scene important? And then finally, how are the characters attached to this scene?
Yep.
3 tiny paragraphs.
Yeah, and it's less. I would say it's even less lore than it is just context.
Correct. Well, the note, I break it down a little later on here, but it does it. Legend, the old 1980s movie Legend, literally breaks down the entire world in, like, I want to say a 1 minute slow fade of text with really nice music behind it. It's very simply done. It doesn't explain everything about the world. It explains the important parts of the world.
Yes.
And every single Warhammer 40k video game has pretty much 5 sentences that open it, or less.
In the grim darkness of the 41st century, there is only war.
That's it. I mean, that you know exactly what's going on.
They even call it grim darkness. I love that. They're so honest about it.
And that is the joy of being able to show and tell at the same time. You're presenting that. And I've seen narrators who've presented their write-ups to their players that way. Just handed them a sheet of the important thing right off the bat.
Yeah.
That's great. That's a great way to get it.
I'm a big fan of the Fallout games. They do a lot of the same thing. That whole war never changes.
Yeah.
We got really heavy into nuclear technology, and then people started fighting over resources, and then war broke out all over the place. China was jerks. We were jerks. Everybody was jerks. Nuclear war happened. And now we're here. Go.
Yeah.
And now our story begins.
Exactly. Another one that just came to us was David Lynch's Dune, where the theatrical one is relatively short, but it's still minutes of lore dump to try and get you into that world.
I don't think I ever saw Dune all the way through. Not all in one setting. It was really weird every time I tried to watch it, so it was always kind of put me off of it. But I'm really excited for the new one.
I'm excited for the new one as well. But I have a love for that art style and that intro.
Sure.
Yet it was necessary because of how important. And if you actually look at the text behind how long it took to read that, it's really not that much text.
No.
There's just a lot of emphasis and impact that's being put through.
It's basically just a paragraph. All right, so where are we at?
I think we're into getting into, let's see here, the more show than tell.
Yes, exactly. So cardinal sin number 1: don't lore dump if you can help it. Do not just sit there and explain things. Like we said earlier, short snippets okay, just to contextualize what's about to happen, but what you're trying to avoid is history lessons. Lectures, PowerPoint presentations. Not really things you wanna do.
No.
Handing them the lore directly is the most boring way to do things, and you will lose your audience, I guarantee it.
Not to mention, and I'm going to put this in the same thing, we're not telling you to either write up a 6-page lore write-up of your world and hand it to your players and say, read this.
But
that's nice.
That's a primer, not a lore dump. Because
Correct.
You're not taking up game time with it.
Right, but at the same time, don't always expect your players to read that.
They won't.
They probably won't.
They won't. I guarantee. I mean, you'll get one person who reads it, one person who skims it, and the rest of them will not. I can guarantee it. Players typically want action. They want involvement. And I guarantee you they're not half as invested in the lore as you are.
Right.
You, as the writer of your story, care about the hows and the whys and the interactions and the who likes who and why, this kingdom is at war with this other kingdom. I guarantee most of the time, I would say 80% of your player base is not concerned with any of that.
Right.
They kind of want to just know where the next dragon to kill is, where the next princess to rescue is,
Yep.
Where the next barmaid to flirt with is.
Yep.
And they're not really concerned about the hows or the whys.
Yeah, and one of the things that Knox brought up as a thought within this is, what about, or at least as a question was, what about presenting the lore from a different perspective? And giving it to them in that direction, maybe from, somebody else's, effectively like a child scribbling or something like that, where it's not necessarily being narrated directly, but indirectly within the canon of the story itself, and you can still run the same risks.
We'll actually get to that,
yeah,
in just a little bit, because that's actually one of the best methods to do it, is to make that lore interactable.
Correct. Don't make it a lore dump that's just a different tone.
Right. I'm not going to sit here and explain to you that, in the Merithic area, Queen, Saint Alessia made a pact with Akatosh that blah, 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 blah. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what the effect of that pact was and why it's relevant to our characters.
Yep.
And then if you want to know more about that history, you can look it up,
Exactly. So let's talk about the points that you want to hit.
Yeah.
And the points to kind of avoid. Chekhov's gun is something we use a lot, and we'll re-reference it a ton more times than that. Anton Chekhov is where the term comes from. And the idea is that if you say in the first chapter there's a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, you shouldn't have put it on the wall.
Yep.
And that's the whole point, is what the reference that we're trying to say there is if you're describing something of importance within the story, a point of reference that is implicit and put forth, you need to make that needs to be part of the story. And anything else is relatively irrelevant.
Yeah. If it is irrelevant, don't bother sharing it.
Yeah.
We don't need to know, what the fringe, why the fringe on the shawls of this holy woman is gold and not silver.
Correct.
If it's not going to matter to the plot, it's probably not worth sharing. Now, on the other hand, if they're like, well, are there ranks among these holy women? Yeah. In fact, you notice the ones that are bossier, that are seem to be more in charge, have gold trim on their shawls. Now it's relevant.
Yeah.
Because someone is getting involved with it. But
they're engaged in that section of the story.
Describing NPCs, typically it's not really a terribly important thing.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love is if you go through media that especially ranks. Ranks are really important. Listen carefully to what's important to either the writer or the storyteller if it's being done in TV or movie, and you will find that oftentimes the better stories, the ones that get in and keep you engaged in those stories, will tone down names and titles to something simplistic. You won't get the full backstory of who this person is and everything else. All you know is that they're Admiral Thrawn.
Yeah.
If you want to know more than that, sure, go digging. That's fine. You might find
Admiral
something.
Sounds pretty important.
Yeah, but all you know is that he is at the top of the chain.
Yeah.
That's what's important. This person just went from captain to another rank, or he was demoted. You're like, okay, he moved up or down, but okay, that's all I know. That's all you need to know. That's all that's important. On the other hand, when you start getting location names or who's working at a location, you know that that's going to be important.
Yeah.
That person's going to come back. That person is either going to be dead, and the reason for their death is going to be very important. So always look for those in the stories and remember that as you're presenting.
So Knox asks, do you ever just not make them roll for lore things? I mean, just take one of their skills and just say, well, because of your hunter skills, you notice, etc.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Do it all the time.
In fact, it's one of the great ways we talk about being a fan of your players. And it's one of the biggest ways to make characters feel important within their places in the story.
And to go back on the things that they felt was important about their character.
Yeah, exactly.
If I wanted to give my character a rank 7 cooking skill, and all we do is combat, Sara might bring up spices and other things of importance.
Actually, you notice, because of your keen nose for cooking, that this and this and this is going on, which leads you to believe such and such is happening.
Yeah.
Because this dish is only cooked in these situations. Suddenly I've given him a lore dump, and I've moved the story forward, giving him important, details on how the movie stories move forward. I've maybe guided him towards the MacGuffin because he noticed a smell, because Rob was cheeky enough to put a rank 7 cooking skill on his sheet.
Yeah, and that can be done for any skill level. And what's interesting is that if you have players who are very adept in combat, it means that they learned that somehow, and that learning teaches them other things.
Exactly.
Besides how to stab people really well, they can also see wounds and know things about them.
Yeah, exactly. And bringing in characters' ethnicities and stuff like that is really great. Because your character is a Nord from Skyrim, you notice X, Y, or Z.
Yep.
Because you're used to the blowing sands of elsewhere, you notice X, Y, or Z.
Yep. Yep. So always prime yourself to know your players. It will always endear them more to your story. even the ones who are not necessarily there for everything, they're just there for the combat, you can still bring them into the story more and give them their opportunities to roleplay with their character and show roleplay. And present through the lore and through that presentation. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up was that, like in session 0, we often are doing kind of our sales pitch as well. We're trying to sell not only the system, but the game, everything about it. And a lot of times people will go into detail about their expansive setting with their 12 races and their 15 countries and their 2 factions and their expansive continent and 12,000 years of history and lore down to the cents used as a language between the lupine race. Great.
That's amazing.
Shove that in the back of your head.
That's amazing, Mr. Tolkien. Thank you for writing all of that.
That is not important to the actual world that these people are going to be playing in.
We are going to be telling a story about heroes and explorers in the Fighters Guild or the Mages Guild.
Yeah.
That is what you need to know.
Yeah. Exactly. And so one of the things that, again, TV shows do really, really well is you don't know anything beyond the visual range of what you are presented. That's it. So, Golden Girls. You didn't know about anything else that was going on in their lives until somebody stepped in, or an object was brought into the house, or they were in a new scene. That was it. That house could have been freaking anywhere. Shady Acres literally could... Do we know if it was in Florida or California or where? Did it matter? No.
Couldn't tell you.
Didn't matter.
Couldn't tell you.
Until there was a tropical storm coming in and the establishing shot showed the Gulf of Mexico, it didn't matter. It did not even remotely matter.
And even then, that gives it like 5 different states it could have been in.
Exactly. And that's the whole point of it is that it isn't relevant to the story. It isn't there's nothing there for the players to attach to.
Yeah.
So presenting something that is 6,000 miles away or 5,000 years ago in history, unless it actually has a direct reference to the story, is just you exalting what you wrote in a book.
And I'd say it muddies the waters a lot for your players, too, because it gives them so many things to focus on that it starts to, leave them kind of wondering, like, what are the important details here? Because I'm only mentally able to hold on to 5 things here, and you've given me 20. Which are the 5 important ones?
Right.
Right.
And I am a terrible person at doing this. I always want to present more. I always want to tell what the world is in my head. I want to show all the rich detail and tell you guys about all the little machinations of the universe that exist. But it doesn't tell the story.
Yeah.
And so I always have to pull my hands back and be like, okay, what are you guys working on right now?
Just ease off. Yep.
And it's a wonderful thing to write it all up and to have those, but save it.
Oh, it is. And I mean, it's then that's not to say don't write any of this stuff.
No,
at all.
no.
I mean, the great thing about as a storyteller about writing all this backstory and all these interactions and such like that is that it gives you as the storyteller what all the cause and effect should be in your world. Okay, so you don't need to tell them that Kingdom A is at war with Kingdom B for X amount of political reasons and 3,000 years worth of history of going back and forth. That's not necessarily, beyond Kingdom A hates Kingdom B and Kingdom B hates Kingdom A, not really something they need to know.
Yeah.
But if they come across, an artifact of Kingdom B and are like, hey, we're in Kingdom A right now, what does this mean? You will have that answer because now it's suddenly relevant because 3,000 years worth of history in your head.
Yeah.
You've written it all.
Yeah.
And you'll have that answer off the top of your head of like, well, what'll happen if we do this? Well, obviously this will happen.
Your players, suddenly your players are all like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that was going to... Like, oh, now they're all excited.
Yeah, and you look like a boss.
Yeah.
Because you just came up with that off the top of your head, and they're like, wow, you've got everything planned out, don't you? Actually, I do.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite things in some games is when players are like, you've been on this ship, and this, these 2 nations are fighting, and you're like, why are they fighting? Well, as best as you can guess, it has something to do with, political borders. Well, I've got some history. All right, roll it. So now you get to present. You get to give the reason why for the last 13 episodes of this game, there have been pirate raiders along the shore attacking the king's ships and this opposing ship. These opposing ships that have been coming in and, besieging the country, which you've been not part of. That's not your part of your campaign, but it's around you at all times.
Now suddenly you've got some context for it, and everything starts to click together.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't important until now.
Yep.
Yep.
Exactly.
One of the big ones that I like to do is, and this is kind of what Knox touched on earlier in the live chat, is making sure that your NPCs are using lore-appropriate language.
Yes.
And this is kind of where you start making your lore dump interactive, because you're not telling them that, like, so in this world, Atronachs, or elementals, are all known as Atronachs, and the Daedra are all, basically what you know as demons. Like, I could explain that to people, but isn't it much better to be like, oh my god, that, the wizard summoned a flame Atronach that was just tearing, through this place. Kind of in context, especially, as anybody who's played D&D more than once, the wizard summoned it. It's a flame, presumably creature of some sort. Oh, it's a fire elemental.
Yeah.
Okay, I get it, but you're just calling it a flame Atronach.
Yeah.
So if I said a frost Atronach, you'd be like, oh, I get it.
Okay.
That's an elemental made out of ice. I see what you're doing there.
Yeah.
And now, because I'm describing this to you using these lore words and giving you the context for them, and it's interactive too. So even if you don't get it, you can be like, I'm sorry, what, an Atra what?
Right.
An Atronach, a being made of flame summoned from oblivion. Oh. A fire elemental.
Summoned creature, fire elemental. Gotcha.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Don't punish your players for not getting the lore. Don't be like, what do you mean you don't know what an Atronach is? Lean into it.
Yeah.
Just let them have it. Let them learn organically.
Yeah, one of the things about Shadowrun is all of the context that's in it. Like, you have stuffer shacks, which are 7-Elevens. Let's just be honest, that's what they are.
Yeah.
But they're called stuffer shacks. So eventually your players start using those terms. They start using the slang. They start connecting with the terms of that society as if it's contemporary to them.
Saying things like frag and drek and chummer.
Exactly. And the more you use it, the more the feel, the more you get connected with the universe.
Yeah, exactly.
So, this is why when you're looking at someone else playing a video game like Dota or Overwatch, and they're talking about goat and in terms that are within that bailiwick of genre, you're confused at first. But until you embed yourself into it a little bit and start getting connected to the terminology, suddenly those things start making sense.
Yeah.
Lanes make sense to you because it's the route that you have to defend or attack upon. Oh, okay. Now I know what I'll use the term lane now.
That's why we call it the 3-road highway.
That's right. So all of this adds up to putting yourself and your players into the world.
Yep.
So.
And then you get to not only just, giving lore dumps through NPCs and such like that,
right,
using lore appropriate, such, but then making your encounters lore appropriate as well.
Right.
And this is where you take lore and you make it interactive.
Right.
Okay. And it's honestly one of the best ways to experience it because you internalize it a lot more when you're interacting with it than when you're just hearing it and like kind of like a lecture. You need to take notes.
Yep.
Even with pictures, if I showed you a picture of it, you might remember a little bit more about it. But unless you've interacted with it in some way, you're still going to forget a bunch of the details.
A bloody note is a great physical interaction.
Yeah, exactly.
It's written in the pen. It's hard to read. There's blood stains on it. You can hand it to the group, and they can physically be part of it.
And a prop is great, but what then does it mean to the characters?
Correct.
Okay, so is that bloody note, for instance, how I introduced the Dark Brotherhood to you guys?
Yep.
Was I had this character who was a murderer, murdered an innocent man, and I gave you his journal. And it was just some pages that I had written up and stuff like that, detailing how he was plotting to kill this man and how he went through with it and such like that, and how a mysterious note showed up tucked into his journal or something like that. And I had created, like, it was folded up with a black hand
right on
print on it and said, "We know." Anybody who knows Elder Scrolls knows this note,
Yeah.
And it would be one thing if I was like, you guys find this note. But it was another thing where I contextualized it around the fact that the moment he murdered somebody, he got this note.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And because you were involved in the story,
Yep.
and you were, you know, all your characters were personally involved, it then meant something to you.
Yep.
You know? So, let's see, I'm just
trying to see if there's some stuff that we want to squeeze in.
We wrote
We've got
so
some
much
great
stuff.
questions. Oh, one other thing that I want to throw in before we get too far out of this was, we're all busy people.
Uh-huh.
It is easy for us to lose sight of what's important. And one of the things you do exceptionally well is recaps.
Oh, yeah.
TV shows love to do this. Last time,
Previously on...
Yeah, exactly. And those kinds of things, although sometimes they do it literally at the beginning of the cut after going to commercial, which is terrible if it's in the middle of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just keep going, keep rolling. But doing the recaps at the beginning for continuations is a great way of bringing the lore in that's important. Again, representing the Chekhov's gun.
Yep.
And then letting them know where they're at exactly.
And it's another great place to start dropping your lore words, like Atronach and Daedra and stuff like that, because they may not remember those words in the heat of the moment, but they remember the events that happened. They remember a fire creature ripped apart some sorcerer's, a tower. But when you're like, and then the flame Atronach destroyed the tower, they're like, oh, I remember that happening.
Yep.
Atronach, that's the word I was forgetting.
Yep. And remember to add any additional flavor in there as appropriate. But don't over-flavor your food. Don't go into a high detail about the weather and the date and time and in season and location and slowly get down to the minutia of the flies buzzing around. That's not important.
It's pretty. It's poetic.
It's poetic.
Come on, let's get going.
Yeah, players want to play the game.
Yeah.
So... All right, we do have some good questions.
We do have some great questions.
I want some of these questions in there. Let's start at the bottom, work our way up.
Grab one.
All right. Arcane Asylum said, at what scale is it appropriate to limit a lore dump to? When done naturally, like PCs doing research?
The PCs doing research is always the tough one, because you want to be a fan of your player, right? And if they're putting the work in to learn the lore, especially doing it in character, like making a research roll or something like that for it, you definitely want to reward their time, their effort, and their interest.
Yeah.
By giving them something to show for it. And it's a great place to be able to just lore dump right to their faces without having to dress it up with all the different stuff that we just talked about, because they're literally saying, I read it out of a book, what does the book say?
So this is the way I always try and think about it. I don't always present this way, but this is the way I think about it. A player, when they make a roll, if it's successful, will get the information that is important.
Yes.
Focus on the important. So for instance, I will give you, off the top of my head, a good roll. So let's say the players are trying to get information on a keep.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, I'm going to do research on when this was built and see what I can find. So let's say target number is, 15, right? Player makes a 15. Excellent. The keep is an old keep and was rebuilt about 55 years ago. Okay, so if it's an old keep, it has, it has access points that are probably underneath it, but probably not a full sewer system. Correct. Okay. Solid, easy lore dump, very simple, got what they needed precisely.
Sure.
Okay, now they roll it again, the same roll happens again, they roll a 19. Okay, do I expound on my lore dump into useless? No. I expound specifics. It is an old keep, was rebuilt 50 years ago by Carrard de France. Now, Carrard is a Frenchman, and from that area specifically, they incorporated aqueducts.
Mm-hmm.
Those aqueducts come in from the east side and are exceptionally important to the full functionality of the keep.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so they're exceptionally important. They're an access point in the east wall, probably guarded. Okay, great. Now they make an exceptional roll.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so not only do I let them know about the aqueducts, but I also let them know that they're under repair.
Mm-hmm.
And the repairmen who are involved in that process are not French. They're locals. And every morning, there's a work crew for the masonry. So now they've gone through, it's a keep, they have an access point, and they now know how they could possibly get in as workmen.
When there's a shift change, yeah.
Correct.
Yep.
So your lore dump can be organic and can give you directly what you need, but I've just explained a lot about that keep in a very short period of time, but kept it very to the point. Now, do your players want more flavor than that? Let them have it. But try and always keep the focus on what's the most important thing that they're getting out of it.
The other thing, too, you can do is if they are seriously interested in a lore dump and they want to know the history and stuff like that, but you don't want to take up the game time with it, you can drop the most important details on them.
Exactly.
And then be like, see me after game, I'll explain everything, all the context.
I'll give you a lot more context.
But the important stuff is A, B, and C.
The other thing, piece of that, is remember that. Bring it back around, put it into an adventure.
Yep.
Let them be rewarded by it.
Yes, exactly. Make it relevant.
Grab another one.
All right, so Overwatch asks, how do you best convey the internal logical consistency of your world building to players during exposition? How do you give them not only the who, what, why, when, and where, but also understand the underpinning of how, and can thus better operate in the world that you build? It's difficult to give them everything like that without getting into the boring stuff. I think, again, it's just important to distill it down to the most important, functionable, actionable points. And then if they then have questions of like, well, wait a minute, why are we constantly being raided by barbarians from the north? Well, okay, now I've got a direct question, I can give you a direct lore answer. But the important point was, you are getting raided by barbarians from the north.
Yep.
If you want to wonder about why, that's up to you.
So I'm going to go back to Star Wars: A New Hope's scroll. It is a period of Civil War. Rebel spaceships striking from a hidden base have won their first victory against an evil galactic empire. That's the first paragraph.
That is dense. That is information dense.
Right.
Yeah.
But I've just given you a complete world overview at a 5,000 foot. Next, during the battle, Rebel spies managed to steal secret plans to the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, an armored space station with enough power to destroy an entire planet. Okay, I've just given you the target, the Chekhov's gun, handed it to you on a silver platter. I've given you the setting, the theme, and the feel of what the characters will be encountered with. Finally, pursued by the Empire's sinister agents, Princess Leia races home aboard a starship, custodian of the stolen plans, to save her people and restore freedom to the galaxy.
Oh, so the galaxy is not free currently?
They're sinister people?
Okay.
She's the one with the plans given to her by spies? She's a custodian of this?
Tells us a lot.
We know everything that is going on, and literally we've done it in effectively
3 sentences.
3 sentences.
Yeah.
Dense sentences, but well done, well-crafted sentences.
Yeah.
That is beautiful and to the point.
That's great. All right, can we squeeze this last one?
We can try. Go for it.
All right, so Knox in the Box asks, with the goal of being to make the info dumping more character interactive, what's a good way to approach narratively changing how players' skills and spells work when conveying info?
Ooh, flavor change.
Yeah, so actually flavor change is actually a very easy and very great thing to do. So like I talked a lot about like the word Atronach, how it basically just means elemental in the Elder Scrolls system.
Right.
But also like I do that with the word magicka.
Yeah.
You notice I never say magic. It's
You say
always
magicka.
magicka.
Yep.
Because that's what the word for it is in the system. And so it's by describing things, I mean effectively all of your rules are just things that happen. They're just rules, you know? So when I roll the dice, it says that, you know, targets A, B, and C take 2d6 fire damage. Okay, that's fine. That's all the rules mechanics. I can describe that any way I want.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why systems like Savage Worlds and GURPS actually work so well.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, there are systems that have realized this and present to you all of your rules in a generic way, so that you can flavor them to whatever setting you want them to be. You want to tell weird West, you know, magical Wild West stories? Cool, do it. All of your spells and your lingo and your things like that will be flavored a certain way.
Without a doubt.
But ultimately, whether I'm slinging a fireball or a blast of energy or congealed darkness from the Shadowfell at you, the end result is a blast against a single target that takes 2d6 damage.
Yeah.
And you flavor that with whatever words are lore appropriate.
Yep.
Whatever descriptors are lore appropriate for you as you want.
My whole take on it is, and this is where things get to, is when you change how the functionality works. Meaning you add an effect, or you change the way an effect works, or you give something that adds an effect, especially with games that are very tactical and have specifics. For instance, if I'm doing divination with somebody, like they do divination, and it specifically says that it gives them a riddle almost, or mystical flavor of the thing, that it's not giving them a direct representation. It's giving them something historical and a reference. Okay, so now I have to come up with some kind of reference there. If I choose to then give them a full vision of the past, have I defeated the purpose of that spell if I change the way it functions? That's what you have to be careful of.
Yeah,
if I make a fireball suddenly now ignite everything on fire within an 180-foot radius for no explainable reason, now I'm a little bit more in trouble. Now I've got to be careful. So always be mindful that you're not adding effects that will alter the universe unless it's irrelevant to the system.
Yeah.
Gauge it to the system.
And that's where your potential problems with unbalancing come in, is it's just making sure that at the end of the day, no matter how you describe it narratively, it's going to come down to the thing. So like those of you who are Critical Role fans, you watched if you watched it all, Critical Role Season 2, Campaign 2, I suppose, you'll see a party with two clerics in the party. Caduceus Clay, who is a nature death domain cleric, or sorry, grave domain cleric, and Jester Lavore, who is a trickster cleric. And they cast a lot of the same spells, but they have far different trappings to those spells. Jester, whenever she casts her divination spells, the traveler comes to her and like takes her by the hand and lifts her ethereally up into the sky, and they soar through the air and go to wherever the target of what they're scrying on is. Whereas Caduceus meditates, and nature comes to him, and a warm breeze blows when the answer is affirmative, or a chilly breeze brushes across his skin when the answer is negative.
Yeah.
But it's all just divination.
Right. In the end, it's still the same effects.
Exactly. And that's really what we're coming down to. So,
I hope that really helps answer it. So next week we're going to be talking about conflict resolution at the table.
Yeah,
a little deeper than where we were at on the previous topic.
We talked a little bit about like player versus, character work versus character sort of thing. This is more player versus player.
So, we're not, again, we're not therapists. We're not there, but we're gonna try and handle it as best we can, because I think it's important right now, especially in a time when we're all just coming out of being a little bit agitated.
A little stressed out and a little traumatized.
So you can find us on Twitter at st_conclave, on Instagram at st_conclave, on MixLR on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern at mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. You can also find a link to our Discord on our Twitter and on our website at storytellerconclave.com. We would love to have you join us. You can also find our link to our Patreon there, where you can become part of our storytelling.
I want to give a big shout-out, as I mentioned, to our Patreon members, Knox in the Box, Sam, Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Vedran, and Hulavu. Thank you so much for supporting us month after month and helping us keep doing this. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find that at patreon.com/arcaneanthems. Our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Guy Frog. You can find that at guyfrog.bandcamp.com. And our outro music, Only Our Footprints in the Sand, by Midair Machine. You can find that at freemusicarchive.org.
We'd like to thank our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for supporting us through all this. All of our friends who have been at our tables and have helped us through all of this lore dump that we've had to give them over the years. And you, our listeners, we love you very much.
We love you.
Good night.
Good night.